Good morning. I certainly hope you enjoyed your Easter holiday. Today's lesson is actually part 2 of the lesson that we had 3 weeks ago. If you'd like to refresh your memory on it, that is still available on YouTube, so you can go back and listen to it if you'd like. Today we're going to continue our look at the mind of Islam, and before we get started, I don't want to leave you with the impression that all professing Muslims are evil mad bombers. So I want to make a distinction between those who are true Muslims, who believe everything the Quran says, and those who don't. Within the Muslim faith, you will find people who don't really follow everything the Quran says. Instead, they'll pick and choose the parts they like and ignore the rest. Lots of people who claim to be Christians will do the same thing with the Bible. So, what you might want to call the good Muslims aren't really true Muslims at all. They've invented their own brand of Islam, and they basically ignore the more violent parts that are found in the Quran. So the Muslims that I'm dealing with here are the dyed-in-the-wool militant Islamists who believe every word the Quran says and live by it. These are the ones who are the evil mad bombers. They'll smile at you and then stab you in the back as you walk away. So remember, when you're dealing with militant Islam and militant Muslims, you're dealing with a group of people who, for the most part, have no moral standards where non-Muslims are concerned, because they believe that Allah has called for the extermination of all non-Muslims. They also believe that Allah really doesn't care what Muslims do as long as it furthers the cause of Islam. And whenever they do something immoral, they believe that Allah is the one who is forcing them to do it, so it must be okay. Truth is, Arabs have been persecuting Jews in the Middle East ever since the days of Abraham, and they added Christians to the hit list when Christ arrived. And that persecution became organized when Muhammad created Islam in the 7th century AD. In fact, Muhammad personally beheaded hundreds of Jewish men near the city of Medina. By the way, if you're interested, the word Islam means submission, and the word Muslim means one who submits. The point is this problem isn't just going to go away anytime soon. While the international community tries to settle this feud by redrawing the lines on a map, they fail to realize that the problem goes much deeper than somebody who gets what chunk of real estate. Also, don't try to be nice to these radicals in the hope that they'll be nice to you in return. It will not work. This is an ancient blood feud that has lasted for over 4,000 years. Islam is just the latest rallying point for the descendants of Ishmael to gather around. Well, why don't the Jews trust the Christians in the world to protect them? After all, Israel is the Holy Land for Christians as well as the Jews. Unfortunately, the tribute that the Jews have received at the hands of the Christians over the centuries hasn't been much better than what they've received at the hands of the Muslims. In fact, the early popes organized religious campaigns against the Jews and executed thousands of Jews and calling them Christ killers. That was the purpose of the Spanish Inquisition that operated from 1478 to 1834. St. Augustine was the first Archbishop of Canterbury in the 5th century. He described Jews as Judas Iscariot who sells the Lord for silver. Then he added, the Jews can never spiritually understand the Scriptures and forever will bear the guilt for the death of Jesus because their fathers killed the Savior. Apparently they're not smart enough to realize that if the Jews hadn't killed Jesus, none of us could have had our sins forgiven today. In 1543, the great Protestant reformer Martin Luther would go on to write some of the most hateful things against Jews to exist outside of the Muslim world. Here are some examples. What then shall we Christians do with these damned rejected race of Jews? Let me give you some honest advice. First, to set fire to their synagogues or schools, and to bury and cover with dirt whatever will not burn, so that no man will ever again see a stone or cinder of them. This is to be done in honor of our Lord and Christendom. Second, I advise that their houses also be razed and destroyed. Third, I advise that all their prayer books and Talmudic writings in which such idolatry, lies, cursing, and blasphemy are taught be taken from them. Fourth, I advise that their rabbis be forbidden to teach henceforth on pain of loss of life and limb. Fifth, I advise that safe conduct on the highways be abolished completely for the Jews, for they have no business in the countryside, since they are not lords, officials, tradesmen, or the like. Let them stay at home. Sixth, I advise that usury be prohibited to them, and that all cash and treasure of silver and gold be taken from them and put aside for safekeeping. Seventh, I recommend putting a flail, an axe, a hoe, a spade, a distaff, or a spindle into the hand of young, strong Jews and Jewesses and letting them earn their bread at the sweat of their brow. Now that came from the pen of Martin Luther himself, and he was one of the founding fathers of modern-day Protestantism as well as the Lutheran Church. So I ask you, why should the Jews trust us? Jimmy Carter was the first useful idiot the Muslims had. He said this in his book titled Palestine, Peace or Apartheid. It is imperative that the general Arab community and all significant Palestinian groups make it clear that they will end the suicide bombings and other acts of terrorism when international law and the ultimate goals of the roadmap for peace are accepted by Israel. In other words, Carter seems to think that the acts of terrorism leveled against Israel are justified until Israel gives the Palestinian Arabs everything they want. Carter was the first poster child for Christian anti-Semitism. Well, Barack Obama, John Kerry, Joe Biden, and most liberal Democrats today have followed in Carter's footsteps and blamed Israel for all the unrest in the Middle East. But remember, Israel has been a reliable ally of the United States since it was formed in 1948, and it's the only free democracy in the Middle East. In fact, Israel is the only country in the Middle East where Muslims have rights and are allowed to vote. One amazing thing, and something that I have never been able to understand, is this. Given the history that we've been talking about, why do the Jews still bend over backwards to accommodate their mortal enemies? And why do the Western nations still insist that all the Israelis have to do is to allow the Palestinian territory to become a sovereign nation and everybody will live happily ever after? If you believe that lie, I have a bridge in Brooklyn I'd just love to sell you. The fact is, less than 24 hours after Kazakhstan announced its independence from the Soviet Union, Yasser Arafat was greeting President Nazarbayev with a kiss on both cheeks. Well, the alarm bells should have gone off all over the world that day. You see, Kazakhstan inherited over 1,150 strategic nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union. And the fact is, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, there are 5 very powerful Muslim republics south of Russia, and at least 3 of them have nuclear weapon stockpiles. The Ukraine isn't controlled by Muslims, but they had a significant number of nuclear stockpiles as well. But Bill Clinton convinced the Ukrainians to return all of their nuclear weapons to Russia in return for a promise of U.S. protection if they were ever attacked by Russia. Well, watch the news and you can see how well we kept that promise. Now here's something else that you won't hear about in the evening news. In order to keep Iran from forming an alliance with Russia's southern neighbors, Boris Yeltsin made a deal with the former president of Iran, Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, and part of that agreement stipulated that Russia was going to sell its best weapons to Iran. This is how Iran acquired 5 Soviet-built Kilo-class diesel submarines, also with billions of dollars worth of weapons. Yeltsin also agreed to help them economically by making some of Russia's best scientists available to them, and that included nuclear engineers, most of which became unemployed when the Soviet Union collapsed. And they're sending all this aid to Iran at the same time that Russia was coming to the United States for our help. Well, the reason that the dumb deal was made was because Boris Yeltsin was an alcoholic and he was drunk most of the time. Remember the plane loads of cash that Obama sent to Iran a few years ago? You see, we're dumb enough to think that if we send them money, they'll know that we're nice people and that they'll be nice in return. So Obama loaded planes with $1.7 billion in cold hard cash and gave it to the Ayatollah to use to build nuclear bombs to kill us. Now, the lamestream media tries to justify that deal by saying that we owed that money to Iran before the 1979 revolution that ousted the Shah. But even if that's true, that money was owed to Iran when Iran was run by the Shah and was our ally. When the Shah was deposed and the Ayatollah took over and they started chanting death to America, who in their right mind would still pay that money to these Muslim radicals? But Obama was that dumb. Well, are they being nice to us today? No. They're using that money to build nuclear bombs to blow us up. And they still parade through the streets almost every day chanting death to America. Well, Russia's current president, Vladimir Putin, is abiding by the agreements made by Yeltsin, and most Middle East Muslim countries are now armed to the teeth with Russian weapons. Are we stupid or what? You see, what actually began as a sibling rivalry between Ishmael and Isaac in the tents of their father Abraham has now escalated into a racial feud that threatens the entire world. Hating Jews has been justified as a religious cause within the Arab community for so long that this hatred seems to be embedded in their genes. Then in 610 AD, a guy named Muhammad came along and he created a new religion that gave credibility to this hatred. Now, there's no doubt that it is a part of their religious doctrine to hate us. So what gave the Muslims the idea that they could take on the United States and win? Well, again, we have Jimmy Carter to thank for that. Jimmy Carter is the one who started us down the road to defeat. And today's liberal Democrats think that the reason that they hate us is that the United States is just too powerful and we need to be taken down a few notches. So liberals are so deeply invested in our defeat that they can't just allow us to win. And that's why whenever the U.S. has been involved in any sort of military conflict, the order of the day is to prevent escalation rather than to actually win. Didn't work in Korea, didn't work in Vietnam, didn't work in Afghanistan. But for the sake of their political future, they are still determined to see to it that whenever we get involved in a military conflict, we don't dare use our military force to actually win. We are to use no more force than our adversary has to use against us, and that guarantees our defeat. But in their warped minds, they think that the world will love us for doing that. The Democrats have been saying all along that Iraq would be the next Vietnam. Well, Harry Truman refused to allow us to win in Korea because he was afraid of the communist Chinese. He even fired General MacArthur for trying to win that war. The Democrats are the ones who caused our defeat in Vietnam for not allowing our military to fight to win. First, their stupid rules for engagement tried the military's hands. They basically told our military to win the war, but don't you dare hurt anybody while you're doing it. But the whole purpose of a military is to break things and kill people who threaten us. And a strong military will tell others to never attack us. And they arbitrarily cut off funding for the Vietnam War, and that's why we had to get out in a panic. They did it again in Afghanistan and are abandoning thousands of people who helped us there. Plus, they basically gave the Taliban over $80 billion worth of some of the most sophisticated military equipment in the world to use against us, rather than removing it or destroying it. The saddest part of this is all of those American soldiers who died in those conflicts died for nothing. And thousands of other people who helped us also died in spite of the fact that we had promised to protect them. How many people have died needlessly because Democrats have never been involved in a war that they wanted to win? We won the 2 conflicts in Iraq because Republicans were in charge. The truth is, whenever Democrats are in charge, America doesn't keep its promises. We didn't keep our promises to reunify Korea. We quit in Vietnam and abandoned thousands of people that we promised to protect. And 59,000 American soldiers died for nothing in that war. We quit in Iran and abandoned the Shah that we promised to protect. Remember when Obama drew what he called the red line into the sand and warned the Syrian president Bashar Assad to not cross it? And when he did cross it, Obama did nothing. We abandoned thousands of people in Afghanistan that we promised to protect, including some Americans, and now they're being systematically executed. Just last month, 400 Afghan government officials were executed by the Taliban. So given the track record among the fact that Democrats are in charge right now, why do you think that our enemies feel very confident that they can defeat us? And why should our allies think that they can trust us to keep our promises to protect them? Radical Islamists all over the world are celebrating the defeat of what they call the Great Satan in Afghanistan. To understand where all of the current trouble in the Middle East began, we have to go back to the late 70s and again to Jimmy Carter. During the Carter presidency, there was only one Muslim nation in the Middle East that was pro-Western and pro-Israel, and believe it or not, that nation was Iran. Now, By no means am I inferring that Iran had a Western-style democracy, far from it. Iran's government was led by Shah Mohammad Razi Pahlavi, and Pahlavi's father, Reza Shah Pahlavi, was suspected of supporting the Nazis during World War II. But most Muslim countries did that because Germany promised to eliminate the Jews. Even so, Iran was still a very good friend of the United States. Well, why was that true? It was true because Shah Pahlavi was not a radical Muslim. So he looked at the poverty that was running rampant in the Muslim world at that time, and then he looked at the success and wealth that the Western countries had, and he recognized the fact that emulating Western-style capitalism would bring the same success to Iran. So beginning in 1963, with the assistance of the United States, he instituted some very significant reforms. In addition to economic reforms, he opened schools, he promoted literacy among the people, including women. He distributed some government land to the citizens. He also sponsored some very large building projects. Well, as a result of his policies, his country prospered. He even went so far as to emancipate women and gave them freedoms that were unheard of in the Muslim world at that time. Unfortunately, in the process of doing those things, the grassroots population became more and more isolated as the wealth created by oil sales was being concentrated among fewer and fewer people. And this created some unrest among the people who expected to have some of that wealth without working for it. So communist rabble-rousers moved in and started creating class envy among the people. They started promising the people that if they introduced communism to Iran, all the wealth that was being held by the upper class was going to be given to them. This idea only appealed to a very small percentage of the population because the standard of living for the average Iranian was so much better than anywhere else in the Muslim world that this unequal distribution of wealth only created unrest among the more radical elements in the country. This is true in every capitalistic society in the world. You see, capitalism promises people the opportunity to be prosperous, but you can only be prosperous if you're willing to work for it. But you will always have those people who don't think that it's fair to actually work for what they get. So they're easily prey for the communist lie that wealth should be distributed equally among the people. But history shows us that that never happens. Well, that's not surprising. Let's look at all the criticism our government gets from people who don't think that life is fair and that they want all the wealth that was earned by other people to be given to them so that they can sit on their butts all day long and do nothing. And they're living in a country that gives them more opportunities to prosper than any other country in the world. The poorest of the poor in the United States have a higher standard of living than the middle-class families do in many parts of Europe and exceeds the very rich in some parts of the world. Paul wrote, "For even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat." This was well demonstrated by the Pilgrims who settled in Massachusetts Bay. Ever wonder why the first Thanksgiving feast happened? Well, perk up your ears because I'm going to tell you. A man named William Bradford was the governor of the Plymouth colony, and he wrote about what really happened in the early days in Plymouth. And it's nothing like the story that our kids are being taught in schools today. The Pilgrims had intended to land in the New World in the spring of 1620. Their intention was to land in Virginia. But because of storms and other delays, they actually arrived in the cold, barren wilderness that they named Plymouth on November 11th, 1620. Well, since they had run out of beer and had no way to make more, they decided to stay where they were. It wasn't because they were alcoholics, but the water really wasn't safe to drink, and because of the little bit of alcohol beer contained at that time, beer was safe. So they decided to stay where they were because they had a fresh supply of water at Plymouth. Well, they had to make it through the first winter with what they had, and during that first winter, half the Pilgrims died of exposure and starvation, including Bradford's wife. Well, when spring arrived, they set about the task of producing food to get them through the next winter, and here's how they did it. By this time, they had met the Indians who lived in the area, and the Indians were used to dealing with the European fur traders who moved up and down the coast. So they weren't hostile. In fact, many of them spoke English. In fact, they taught the Pilgrims how to plant corn, fish for cod, and skin beavers and other animals to make coats. And this is where most modern history lessons end. but doing those things didn't bring prosperity. Well, a part of the agreement that was made with their financial backers in England was that everybody would get a plot of land to work, and whatever they produced would be brought into a single storehouse and would be distributed to everyone in the colony on an as-needed basis throughout the year. That sounds like socialism. You're right, it is. Everyone was supposed to produce as much as they could, and whatever they produced would be shared equally among the colonists. Nobody owned anything. All the land that they cleared and the houses that they built were owned jointly by the community. Everything belonged to everybody, and everybody got an equal share of what was produced. I mean, what could be more fair than that? Well, it wasn't long before Bradford realized that this system had created a bunch of slackers who didn't really produce very much. They just sat around and waited for what everybody else in the colony produced. After all, why bust your butt when you'll get just as much if you're doing nothing? Even the ones who weren't producing as much as they could because they knew that no matter what they produced, they were only going to get the same as everybody else. You see, this system destroyed the incentive to be as productive as it could be. That attitude is alive and well in the minds of every socialist in the world. Bradford wrote in this journal, "For this community was found to breed much confusion and discontent and retard much employment that would have been to their benefit and comfort. For young men that were much able and fit for labor and service did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without recompense. That was thought injustice." Bradford realized that people can't be expected to do their best work without an incentive to do it. Well, as a result of socialism, they didn't produce enough to get them through the next winter, and many more people died. So Bradford knew that he had to do something to correct this disaster, and they would never make it through the next winter. And here's what he did. He gave each family a piece of land to own and work and manage. The size of the plot was determined by the size of the family. And single men were assigned to help the larger families in their work. Then whatever they produced was theirs to keep. And if they produced more than they needed, they could sell it. This also served to create a merchant class who could make and sell whatever they produced. Bradford wrote this as a very good success, for it made all hands industrious, so as much more was planted than otherwise would have been. In a nutshell, after enduring months of hardship, Bradford did away with the failed socialist system and unleashed the power of the free market. That's capitalism, folks. And from that point on, the colony prospered. And we've been a capitalistic country ever since. And this prosperity attracted many more Europeans to move to Plymouth and started what became known as the Great Puritan Migration. Well, the first Thanksgiving was not held to thank the Indians for helping them. This is what our schools are teaching our young minds full of mush. Bradford and the Pilgrims had to fill the feast to thank God for his blessings. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with being grateful to the Indians for their help. In fact, they were invited to the party. But that wasn't why the first Thanksgiving was celebrated. It was celebrated to thank God. And that's what George Washington wrote on the first Thanksgiving proclamation. Well, as I said earlier, the civil unrest in Iran was being stirred up by and funded by the Soviet Union in order to squelch the only pro-Western country in the Middle East. The Shah's pro-West, pro-Israel, and pro-women policies also drew criticism from Iran's clergy, who were mostly Shiites. Well, in response to this Soviet-backed opposition, the Pahlavi government became more repressive and started using the secret police called the Savak to stop the anti-government movement by force. And in return for all the support the Shah Pahlavi had given to the United States in the past, not to mention the oil, Jimmy Carter promised to support and protect the Shah's government. But almost overnight, instead of looking at the Shah in comparison to the brutal medieval-style anti-Western, anti-Israel, anti-women governments that surrounded Iran, and being thankful that there was a promising pro-Western country in the region, Jimmy Carter ignored all of the medieval brutality in the area, and he turned a critical eye toward the Shah. So in the eyes of the Democrats in the United States, the Shah went from being an enlightened reformer and friend of the United States and a one ray of hope in the dark area of the world, and became in Jimmy Carter's mind a repressive tyrant. So when the Soviet-backed Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini and his fanatical Shiite followers took control of the country in 1979, Carter sat by and did absolutely nothing. In fact, during the takeover, Carter even went so far as to tell the top 400 government officials in Iran not to resist the Ayatollah's takeover because the United States would protect them. And all 400 of them were promptly executed by the new Shiite government. Another broken promise. This has told the world that a promise of protection coming from the United States was meaningless. By the way, we're sending the same message to the world again as the Democrats are trying their level best to get the United States to go back on its promise to protect Iraq by abandoning them. And Iraq is currently the only Muslim-controlled democracy in the world. Well, Joe Biden has kept the tradition of broken promises alive by abandoning our friends in Afghanistan to the Taliban. Funny how history repeats itself. Well, for the Ayatollah Khomeini and his radical Shiite followers, this was a defining moment in history. Not only had they defeated the Shah, they had defeated the United States, the great Satan that was backing him. The fact that Carter hadn't lifted a finger to defend the Shah told them that the United States was a paper tiger. And that's exactly what Osama bin Laden called us just before he launched the attack on the World Trade Center towers in New York. He said the United States was too afraid of Allah and the Muslims to attack them. That attitude among radical Muslims is what brought on the 9/11 attacks against the World Trade Center in New York. But the fact is, the Shah wasn't defeated by radical Islamists. The Shah was defeated by Jimmy Carter. And our Afghan allies weren't defeated by the Taliban either. They were defeated by Joe Biden. I cannot stress enough the impact that these events had on the radical Muslims in the world. They saw the defeat of the Shah and then the Afghans as the defeat of the United States. They saw it as Allah's way of saying that Islam was going to be the dominant force in the world. Well, to prove it, in 1979, the new Iranian government that was run by Shiite radicals that were led by Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was the then president of Iran, stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and they took 52 embassy employees hostage and held them for 444 days. And all Jimmy Carter did was make idle threats that he never acted on. These Shiites didn't release those hostages until Ronald Reagan, a Republican, took office in 1981 and told the Iranians to let the hostages go or he was going to turn Tehran into a parking lot. And they knew that Reagan wasn't going to just sit idly by and let them get away with it. So even before Reagan was sworn into office, the hostages were released. And out of pity for Carter, Reagan allowed Carter to welcome the hostages back home when they returned to the United States. Now understand this, folks. Taking that embassy was an overt act of war. Embassies all over the world are considered to be the sovereign ground of the nation that operates them. So, legally speaking, attacking a U.S. embassy in Tehran was no different than attacking the United States itself. But bumbling Jimmy Carter didn't know how to get the hostages released, so he did absolutely nothing about it. And Khomeini and the radical Shiite followers were amazed at the lack of response coming from the greatest military power in the world. So they were convinced that this had to be Allah's doing. See, to the Muslims, Allah had emasculated Carter along with the entire U.S. military and had given Muslims a great victory. So they had no reservations at all about parading the hostages in front of the Western world as a jab in the eye of Carter and the United States. It was also seen as a trophy to show the Muslim world that Allah had given them a victory over the great Satan. And all Carter did was shake his finger at Iran and tell them that their behavior was unacceptable. Carter did make a feeble attempt at rescuing the hostages, but since his administration had gutted the military budget to a point where they couldn't maintain their equipment, it promptly broke down as soon as they tried to use it. And to the radical Muslims in the world, the failure of the U.S. rescue attempt was just another miracle performed by Allah against the great Satan. Unfortunately, U.S. actions since then have sent the same message of weakness to the Muslim world. And the fact that Iran never paid any penalty for their actions confirmed that fact to them, and that's Ronald Reagan's fault. Well, spurred on by their success against the United States and safe in the knowledge that the liberal Democrats in America will do everything in their power to assure U.S. defeat in the Middle East, Iran has gone on to be the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world today. They feel safe in doing that because they're convinced that Allah is going to protect them. I mean, after all, look at what they did to the United States when Carter was president. Nothing happened to them. And look at all the things they've gotten away with since then, and no response is coming from the West. So why should they fear retribution? They haven't seen any yet. And then that's because Allah is protecting them. And we really haven't done very much to convince them that they're wrong to think that way. In 2007, the incident involving 15 British sailors that were taken hostage by Iran is only the latest proof that radical Islamists need to convince themselves of Western impotence and Allah's greatness. After all, when those sailors were taken prisoner, there was a British gunboat right there watching it happen. And they didn't lift a finger to save their people. Even the sailors themselves were armed, but because they were told not to resist, they didn't even lift a finger to defend themselves. Ahmadinejad even went so far, went on the air, and he said he decided to release the Brits as an Easter present to Great Britain. And in honor of Easter, he asked Prime Minister Blair not to punish the sailors for violating Iranian waters. That's what the Jews call chutzpah. Since when did Ahmadinejad ever give a rat's rear end about honoring Christian holidays? So what's the bigger picture? Emboldened by all the success that Allah has given them against the great Satan, the Shiite Muslims in Iran are convinced that there is a sign that the Mahdi is going to be coming very soon. And the radical Shiites feel that very safe in creating the world chaos that they think is going to hasten his return. So we have Jimmy Carter to thank for the turmoil in the world today. He is the one who basically emboldened radical Islam. Well, in the name of political correctness, every president since Carter has been nurturing this attitude among Muslims, and Islamists have been at war with the U.S. ever since, and we have been ignoring them. One commentator reported, "We refuse to make war on radical Islam, even though radical Islam is at war with us." That's the stand that a British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, took with the Nazis just before World War II, and you can remember where that got us. We need to wake up and recognize the threat before it's too late. Joe Biden, aided by Chucky Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, basically told the terrorists that the United States can't possibly beat them, so we would be pulling U.S. troops out of Afghanistan in a few months. How dumb can you be? That sent a message to the Taliban that if they can just hold out a little bit longer, Trump would be out of office and we could cut and run as soon as they were in power again. You cannot imagine how our retreat from Afghanistan emboldened the Islamists in the world. When they saw us cut and run from Afghanistan, there was no doubt in their minds that Allah had allowed them to defeat the great military power in the world again. I mean, after all, they had already defeated the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. A similar event took place not long after World War II began. At the beginning of the war, the Japanese didn't sink a single U.S. submarine because they didn't think our subs could dive as deep as they actually could. So they were setting their depth charges to explode too shallow. And of course, how deep our subs could actually dive was classified information. But a Democrat congressman from Kentucky named Andrew May was on the House Armed Services Committee, and he knew how deep our subs could dive. Well, one day he started bragging to a bunch of reporters about how our subs were avoiding Japanese depth charges by diving underneath them, and told them how deep our subs could go. And within hours it showed up in every newspaper in the country. Well, before the month was over, we had lost 10 submarines and 800 sailors because of that man's stupidity. By the way, May was later sent to jail for taking bribes. Well, the defeat of the United States made the Muslims feel invincible. They also saw this as a confirmation that Allah wants them to continue to create chaos in the world in order to hasten the return of the Mahdi. They'll say, why would Allah give us all these victories if that wasn't true? The Democrats went berserk when Donald Trump used a drone to kill Iran's most dangerous terrorist, General Qasem Soleimani. They wanted to impeach him for killing the one guy that was responsible for most of the terrorism in the world today. They claimed that killing him violated international law. Well, I think that launching terrorist attacks against U.S. soldiers violated international law too. The Democrats' strategy for winning war is appeasement. Don't make your enemy mad. At this point, there is absolutely nothing that radical Islamists would be afraid to try against us because they would be convinced that Allah would give them the victory. It isn't that we couldn't defeat them, it's that the Democrats won't let us defeat them. They call us racist and warmongers for even suggesting it. Well, until that changes, be prepared to fight them on the front lawns, folks. And remember to thank the Democrats when that happens. Now, the doctrine concerning the treatment of non-Muslims became firmly established under Caliph Omar in the late 7th century A.D. These rules have been downplayed by the media, but they are a reality of any non-Muslim, especially Jews, who are unfortunate enough to have lived in a Muslim-controlled country. Non-Muslims who are living in Muslim-controlled areas are called dhimmis by the Muslims, and as dhimmis, Jews are forbidden to even touch the Quran. They must wear special clothing and a yellow badge. For Christians, the badge is blue. They cannot perform any religious practices in public. They are not allowed to show any grief when they bury their dead. As an expression of gratitude for being allowed to live in a Muslim country, they must pay a special tax called a jizya that is described in the Quran. Islamic law says that even though killing a Muslim is punishable by death, a Muslim who kills a non-Muslim is only required to pay what they call blood money to the family of the victim. But it's unlikely that even that small penalty will be imposed because the law also says that the testimony of a Christian or a Jew isn't valid in a court of law if the testimony is against a Muslim. And what Muslim is going to testify against another Muslim for the sake of an infidel? The result is Jews and Christians live every moment of their lives in fear. This is the kind of double standard that is a norm in Muslim countries. This discrimination applies to women as well. For example, women cannot testify in the court of law. The only way a Muslim man can be convicted of rape is if the crime is witnessed by two Muslim men who are willing to testify against the rapist. If that doesn't happen, the woman can be executed for falsely accusing the man. Jews in Yemen were forced to live as subhuman slaves. On the Jewish Sabbath, they were forced to clean public latrines and clear the streets of dead animals' carcasses without pay. Yemenite law says that any fatherless Jewish baby is to be taken away from its mother and raised as a Muslim. Stoning Jews was a common practice in Yemen until 1948, when most Yemenite Jews fled to the country of Israel. Even today, a non-Muslim cannot be a citizen of a Muslim country. In most Muslim countries, converting to Islam from Islam to any other religion is a crime that's punishable by death. Well, since Obama was a practicing Muslim who claimed to have converted to Christianity, assuming that he wasn't lying, he was living under a sentence of death. Around 1 million Armenian Christians were slaughtered by Turkish Muslims in the early 20th century. In 1987, more than 1,000 Jews, including women and children, were killed by Muslims in the town of Diem in the western Sudan. Over 400,000 Christians have been killed in the Darfur region of Sudan last year alone. And all this killing is going on right under the watchful eyes of the U.S. peacekeeping forces that are there. Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the UN, said that it isn't right for UN forces to interfere. If that's true, then why are they there? And the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, hasn't done anything to change that. Today, UN soldiers regularly force Sudanese Christians to allow their daughters to be raped by them in exchange for food. And huge numbers of Christians are being murdered in Afghanistan as we speak. It's not unique for Christians and Jews to receive this sort of treatment in Muslim countries, so it's no wonder that most Jews would rather die than let the Muslims gain control of Israel. Muslim countries actually teach anti-Semitism as a regular part of their school curriculum. History students in Jordan are taught, and I quote, "The Jews in Europe were persecuted and despised because of their corruption, meanness, and treachery." In a class on the Quran, students were asked this question: Israel was born to die. Prove it. A Syrian junior high school reader contains this: the Jews lived in exile and are despised, since by their nature they are vile, greedy, and enemies of mankind. An Egyptian junior high grammar textbook made this statement: the Arabs do not cease to act for the extermination of Israel. An Egyptian 9th grade textbook says, Israel hopes to be the homeland of the Jew, and they have a stubbornness of 4,000 years of history behind them. But Israel shall not live if the Arabs stand fast in their hatred. She shall wither and decline, even if all the human race and the devil in hell conspire to aid her, she shall not exist. Muslim schools teach children that Christians and Jews are hated by Allah, and that Christians and Jews are on the same level as monkeys. So when a Muslim kills a Jew or a Christian, they see it as killing a monkey. Well, many of these same textbooks are currently being used by Muslim schools in the United States, folks. Elementary school children in the Palestinian territory are given fake bomb vests to wear, and they're told how wonderful it is to be a suicide bomber for Allah. So when someone tells you that Islam is the religion of love, don't you believe it. Do you know that any other group that would teach? Do you know of any other group that would teach their children how great it is to strap on a bomb and blow themselves up in order to kill people? A few years ago, I saw a tape of a children's show that was aired on Palestinian TV with a guy dressed up as Mickey Mouse. On one part of the show, children called in and sang songs that they had written. Here are the lyrics from a couple of the songs that were being sung by the kids that called into the show. One 12-year-old girl sang, "The people firmly stand singing this to you. Rafa sings, oh, oh, its answer is an AK-47. We who do not fear, we are the predators of the forest." A 12-year-old boy sang this one, "Old Jerusalem, we are coming. Old Jerusalem, it is the time of death. Old Jerusalem, we will never surrender to the enemy, and we will never be humiliated. It is beloved Palestine that has taught us what to be, and taught us to be the soldiers of Allah. We will destroy the chair of the despots. It is the time of death. We will fight a war." Well, why do they teach their kids to hate like that? They do it because that's what the Quran tells them to do. Here are a few verses from the Quran. The only reward of those who make war upon Allah and His Messenger and strive after corruption in the land will be that they will be killed or crucified or have their hands and feet on alternate sides cut off. When you see the unbelievers in the battlefields, cut off their heads. And when you have laid them low, bind your captives firmly. Thus you shall do. As for those who are slain in the cause of Allah, He will admit them to the paradise He has made known to them. Does that sound like a problem that's going to go away by redrawing a few lines on the map? Does that sound like people who are interested in getting along with Christians and Jews? Even though there are no Jews living openly in Muslim countries today, the official Muslim press continues to publish anti-Semitic literature with the full blessing of the governments involved. Here are a few examples. In 1987, El Aram, a leading daily newspaper, carried this review of a book called The First Terrorists. "I lower my pen in respect for the author who presents proof from Israeli books to the malice of the Jews who wish to kill all male newborn and pregnant women in order to uproot the Palestinians. The author speaks about turning facts upside down, such as their claim that the gas chambers used by Hitler to get rid of people infected by plague were especially built to burn Jews alive." Another daily newspaper called Salt El Arab claims Israel sells to Egypt seeds, plants, and cattle infected with disease in order to destroy the local agriculture. El Mokhtar El Islami, which is a monthly religious magazine, published this in 1986. The Jews were responsible for World War II. They initiated this war in order to crush Nazi Germany, which was the last obstacle before Jewish domination of the world. Europe was indeed destroyed, and Zionist strategy had its victory. The Jews were also behind the murder of, get this, Abraham Lincoln. Salt Philistine, which is a semi-official weekly that is published for Palestinians, said this: Deception and treason are the basic components of Jewish character. Jews always use tricks and plots to spread terror and death all over the world. Can you imagine what would happen if a group in the United States started publishing hate literature like that against homosexuals or African Americans? We condemned South Africa when they promoted segregation of the races, and we're ready to hang anyone who uses the N-word, even though African Americans use it all the time. But then we'll ignore the hate that is spewing out of the Muslim community on a daily basis. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning those practices, but when was the last time you heard anyone condemn the Muslims for their promotion of hatred against Christians and Jews? The world seems to be blind where these people are concerned. I guess all you have to do is strike oil and you can do whatever you want to do and no one is supposed to say anything about it. The irony of all this seems to be the fact that even though the Muslims demonstrated an intense hatred for the Jews, at the same time they're doing that, many analysts feel that the rise in Islamic fundamentalism is a direct response to an odd sort of respect that the Arabs have for the faith of the Jewish people. After the Six-Day War in 1967, many Muslims were licking their wounds and trying to figure out why Allah had abandoned them. The predominant feeling was they lost because they had failed to be faithful to the tenets of Islam. As a result, the Arab nations started to cater to the most extreme elements within Islam in the hopes that Allah would give them victory the next time they attacked Israel. 2 months after their defeat, the Egyptian press reported they had distributed booklets to every soldier in the army that explained the meaning of jihad, the holy war, and retelling the stories of Muhammad's military conquest. Now, don't think for a moment that Islamic hatred is only directed toward Jews. I mean, they hate Christians just as much. In 1992, Muslims in Egypt burned 15 houses and shops that were owned by Christians, killing 9 and injuring 22. There are about 8 million Coptic Christians living in Egypt today, and most of them are forced to stay inside their mud hovels for months at a time because of the Muslim persecution. One man said, "Life for Christians is over here. Now we must figure out how to get out." A Pakistani court sentenced a Christian to death because a Muslim said that he spoke out against the Prophet Muhammad. The accusation was made by one Muslim, and that was the only evidence offered in the trial. Even after Afghanistan became a democratic country, they still sentenced a man to death for converting to Christianity. The intervention of the United States was the only thing that saved his life. Now that the Taliban are back in power, look for more and more executions of non-Muslims. The thing that most Westerners don't understand is the fact that this hatred is actually a part of their religion. The Muslim holy book pulls no punches in its denunciation of Jews and Christians. Here are a few quotes. "Take neither Jews nor Christians for your friends. Whosoever of you seeks their friendship shall become one of their number. Allah does not guide the wrongdoers. Ignominy, meaning public shame, shall be their portion, meaning Jews and Christians. Wheresoever they are found, they have incurred anger from their God, and wretchedness is laid upon them, because they disbelieve the revelations of Allah, and slew the prophets wrongly, because they were restless and used to transgress. Those who disbelieve our revelations, we shall expose them to the fire. As often as their skins are consumed, we shall exchange them for fresh skins, that they may taste the torment. They," meaning Jews and Christians, "will spare no pain to corrupt you. They desire nothing but your ruin. Their hatred is clear from what they say, but more violent is the hatred that their breasts conceal." Now I ask you, how can you make peace with a man whose religion it is to hate you and destroy you? How do you negotiate with people who are demanding your death? I mean, where is the middle ground where you can start when they start demanding your death? Where do you give up in order to make a deal? Give me this and I'll let you kill me next year? For peace to happen in the Middle East, the Muslims would actually have to give up their religion, and the Jews would actually have to give up their lives. And trust me, that is not going to happen. In fact, the mere existence of the State of Israel threatens the very foundations of Islam. The Quran teaches that Allah is finished with the Jews. Well, if that's true, then how can Allah allow Israel to exist? As long as Israel exists, the tenets of Islam are being questioned. Something else that fuels the flames of this hatred is the story that is fed to the minds of every Muslim child from the day he is old enough to understand it. They're constantly being told that the Jews use the blood of Muslim children in their religious rituals, especially at Passover, and Christians drink the blood of Muslim children to celebrate communion. I mean, of course, that's not true, but almost every Muslim in the world believes that it is. To Muslim children, the Jew is the boogeyman, and Muslim parents will threaten to turn their children over to the Jews if they don't behave. Now, the Bible of Anti-Semitism is a book called Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It tells how the Jews are plotting to take over the world. No one has ever taken credit for writing it because it was plagiarized from earlier writings, and it is a total fraud. You see, not a word of what it says has ever been shown to be true. It was first published in Russia in 1903 under the title The Protocols of the Meetings of the Learned Elders of Zion. Later on, attempts were made to cover up the existence of the Russian edition by inserting French-sounding words, and it received widespread circulation under its present title in 1927. It's supposed to give an ideological justification for the extermination of the Jewish people. Some German teachers assigned it as required reading and pass it off as true. In fact, it was used by Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin to justify their persecution of the Jews, and is still being distributed today by groups like the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi groups. In fact, you can even get a copy of it on Amazon. It is filled with lies, contradictions, and unsubstantiated accusations. Not a word of it is true. But the Muslim world has taken this book and translated it into 7 different languages. It started circulating again in Europe in 1992, and is now being published by the recently liberated country of Kuwait. The fact is, the false propaganda that is being spread by Muslims concerning Jews and Christians would make Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, green with envy. You had a small taste of it coming from Saddam Hussein during Desert Storm. They considered it perfectly acceptable to exaggerate and tell complete falsehoods in order to get what they want. Do you remember the former Iraqi information minister that was nicknamed Baghdad Bob? His real name is Mohammed Saeed al-Sahif. He was standing in front of all the cameras telling the people in Baghdad that the Americans weren't in the city, and if they dared to enter, the Iraqi army was going to slaughter them. Well, at the very moment he was saying that on camera, American bullets were flying over his head and American tanks were seen coming down the road right behind him. Okay, what's the point of all this? First, regardless of what the media may tell you, don't expect to see any real peace in the Middle East. Second, the conflict in the Middle East began in the tents of Abraham over 4,000 years ago. It's a part of their culture, and it's not something that is going to go away by redrawing some lines on a map. This hatred was what inspired Muhammad to create Islam in the first place. So hating Jews and Christians is actually a requirement of that religion. Also, the mere existence of the nation of Israel is a contradiction of what the Quran teaches. For any Muslim to suddenly give up his opposition to Christians and Jews, which is a struggle that he calls a jihad or a holy war, he's going to have to give up his religion. And don't expect 2 billion Muslims to give up their religion anytime soon. Third, it will be this 4,000-year-old feud that will erupt in World War III. But you know, the really amazing thing is this. Americans and Europeans seem to be oblivious to what's happening right before their eyes. They think that Muslims are just like us and all they want is freedom and prosperity and to be left alone. I remember Rosie O'Donnell saying that we have nothing to fear from Muslims because they are all mothers, fathers, grandmothers, and grandfathers just like us. Well, pardon me, but that woman is an idiot. I can't remember my parents or grandparents strapping a bomb vest on me and telling me how glorious it is to blow myself up in order to kill people I disagree with. But the dream of every Muslim is to win the world for Islam, and they'll use any means necessary to do that. Not long ago, a terrorist in Baghdad noticed that the soldiers were a little bit lax about checking cars that had young children in them. So a car pulled up at a checkpoint with 2 adults in the front seat and 2 small children in the back seat. They convinced the soldiers to let them park near a shopping area because they said that they were going to leave their kids in the car and they wanted to be close by. But as soon as they parked, the two adults got out and ran away, leaving the kids in the car. A few seconds later, they detonated the bomb that was planted in the car, killing several people, including the two children. That's how loving Muslims care for their children, at least the radical Muslims. That's an example of the type of people we're dealing with. And the West is being flooded by millions of Muslim immigrants every year. And what are we doing about it? We're ignoring it. There are several of them in Congress today, and they're spouting hatred of Jews in Congress and Christians too. All right, next week we're going to look at the tribulation and the rapture of the church.